Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, May 18th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Nathan Tankus, the Modern Money Network Research Director, on what we're going to do and what we're doing to mitigate massive depression. Meanwhile, Trump fires the State Department Inspector General. Was it really about dog walking? Or was it, in fact, about a near-completed investigation into the fast-tracking of arms sales to Saudi Arabia? Also on the program today, on Friday, Democrats passed the biggest, most unambitious relief bill ever. They do, however, change the rules to allow for remote voting, which is the first time the House has had such rules in 231 years. Meanwhile, the Fed chair warns of 25% unemployment. Google to face federal and state antitrust suits in coming weeks, months. Cell phone data suggests that the lockdown protests may have spread COVID wide and far. FDA halts coronavirus testing program backed by Bill Gates. This is another one of Jared Kushner's ideas. And Texas had a massive spike of new cases on Saturday. Fell back down on Sunday. We need more information, but Trump's administration says no spikes in opening states. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. I don't know the best way to get into this, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. This show is not really about this type of thing, but my good friend lost his very close girlfriend over the weekend. You probably have heard about this, maybe in the news, but Mark Maron had been involved with Lynn Shelton. She was a director of TV and film, and she passed away on Saturday of a blood infection that had nothing to do with COVID-19, but I can only imagine that maybe during a different era or a different time when there wasn't a pandemic, that maybe a doctor would have caught what was going on quicker, but she apparently had some type of blood disorder. I'm not quite clear, but it's a heartbreaking story for Mark. And so I don't know. I know we have, obviously share some fans. So listeners, longtime listeners. So, if you have the opportunity to send some condolences to Mark on Twitter, probably wouldn't hurt. You can go. He posted an interview. The first time he met her actually was on his show. It's pretty heartbreaking. But my heart goes out to Mark. Tough time for folks right now. We lost Fred Willard too, of natural causes. He was 86, so was able to live a good life. I think he would probably appreciate this.
Hey, what happened?
He passed away. Very funny guy. I don't know that I ever had an opportunity to meet him. If I did, it was very brief. But I just, as a comedian, I've always had a lot of appreciation for the work he has done. So, all right. Well, let's move on. I was planning about talking about that later, but just what are you going to do? All right, let's move on to some which I'm sure we all, in many respects, would like to be able to completely divorce ourselves from reality that is existing now. A lot of hardship out there. There's going to be a lot more coming, both in terms of health problems and deaths and economic hardship. We are on the it's unclear at this point, where we're at in terms of that economic hardship. We will talk more about that with Nathan Tankus. But in the meantime, here is Eric Trump on a day where we've basically lost, I think as of yesterday, probably 87,000 Americans. We're up to close to 90,000 Americans who have passed away as of today. We are at best 25% infection rate in New York at best, 5-7% maybe the rest of the country at best. Hopefully we'll get some treatments that will deal with this, but here's Eric Trump basically explaining that this is all basically a hoax. They're still saying this.
76 days to be exact away. And listen, Biden loves this. Biden can't go on stage without making some horrible blunder. I mean, even from his basement, he's making awful gaffes every single day. So his campaign's thrilled that he's not going out there. And they think they're taking away Donald Trump's greatest tool, which is being able to go into an arena and fill it with 50,000 people every single time, right? So they will, and you watch, they'll milk it every single day between now and November 3rd. And guess what? After November 3rd, coronavirus will magically all of a sudden go away and disappear, and everybody will be able to reopen. They're trying to deprive him of his greatest asset, which is the fact that the American people love him, the fact that he's relatable, the fact that he can go out there and draw massive crowds. Joe Biden can't get 10 people in a room. My father's getting 50,000 in a room, and they want to do everything they can to stop it. So make no mistake, to a lot of them, Janine, to a lot of them, this is a very cognizant strategy that they're trying to employ. It's no different than, again, the nonsense that they're trying to throw in the HOPE Act. It's no different than the mail-in voting that they want to do all these places. It's no different than wanting illegal immigrants to vote in our country. It is a cognizant strategy. And it's sad. And again, it's not going to be allowed to happen. We're going to win in November.
Think about the level of pathology and insanity involved in going on national television and every single human being who is involved in bringing that to you. I mean, almost down to the sound engineers that are just sitting there and just like don't have the they've got jobs to do. I can understand that, but the idea that the I guess the stay-at-home orders are a strategy by Democrats to help Joe Biden. How insane do you have to be to actually? I mean, I don't know how insane you have to be to actually believe it. I don't know, but the question is, how insane do you have to be to go and say that on television in front of people? This is a strategy. Democrats don't control anything. They certainly don't control any of the states that, I mean, I guess it's Wisconsin. They don't control Wisconsin. They think this is all a strategy so that Donald Trump can't do a rally in Long Island or in Albany or in L.A. It's nuts. This is what a suicide cult looks like. And, we'll never know if the leader of this cult and his family actually believe this stuff or not. We won't know. I suspect, though, that they will not be, the ones sipping on that Kool-Aid when that happens. But that's just bizarre. And I don't know when the second wave is going to hit. I don't know if we're going to see spikes on these states that have opened up in the near term. But at one point or another, just like you could see that data with Sean Hannity, these people are going to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. And maybe also the economic deprivation, because they will have, we will at one point have to go back in to clean up the damage in a way that is far more intense than we're experiencing now, to clean up the damage that these people are creating. It's unbelievable. They're nuts. Really nuts. Couple of ads, and then we will speak with Nathan Tankus. For all our sakes, we need to avoid crowds in any way we can right now. But what if you need to go to the post office? What if you need postage, send out letters and packages? Well, don't worry. Stamps.com is here to help. With Stamps.com, you can print postage on demand, skip those lines and crowds at the post office. You can personally print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, for anywhere. My daughter is on a Depop kick right now, which is where you sell clothes on online. It's basically, her business model is, I buy her clothes, she sells them, and then she thinks she's made money. But she's gone to town on this. So all you got to do is you print it out. You can do it anywhere at any time. She does it 3 a.m. You just leave it for your mail carrier. You can schedule a free package pickup, or you drop it in a mailbox. No human contact required. Whether you're a small business sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or you can just working from home, you need to mail stuff. Stamps.com can handle it with ease. With Stamps.com, you get great discounts too. 5 cents off every first-class stamp and up to 62% off USPS shipping rates. And now Stamps.com offers UPS service with discounts up to 62%. You won't even have to pay UPS residential surcharges. Right now, get a special offer that includes 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Majority Report. That's Stamps.com. Enter the code Majority Report. Folks, the New Yorker publishes the best writing by the most influential authors in the world. You don't need me to tell you this. They've got award-winning reporting. They got political commentary. They got cultural criticism. They got fiction and poetry, cartoons, and more. In addition to the weekly print magazine, NewYorker.com has become a daily digital destination for news and cultural coverage, the complimentary app that provides the best of both worlds. I've told you folks in the past that when we started getting ads from the New Yorker, it's one of the few times I've actually been like proud of myself in some way. I've read the magazine for, I don't know now, 30 some odd years. And I read it on a weekly basis. This morning I read this piece from March 16th. I think someone must tweet it out. I think maybe it was Brooks. What Mike Flynn did for Turkey, to remind me of the issues that had nothing to do with Russia with Mike Flynn, that had to do with the fact that he was on the payroll of a foreign government while he was named the NSC chief. That's just a little problem. but it's New Yorker's an incredible resource for stuff like that. Plus, not only can you, right now you go over there, Dexter Filkins has a great piece on the twilight of the Iranian Revolution. There's all sorts of amazing stuff every week. You don't need me to tell you about it in the New Yorker, but I will say this, that one, I read it for work, and two, I read it so I can also sort of like, it's my one cultural like tether, if you will. And they have the best writing that exists. New Yorker's exceptional writers make them unique. Theater critic Hilton Als, who won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for criticism. Multiple award-winning Robin Wright covers politics and international affairs, specializing in stories about the Middle East. And now you can get 12 weeks for just $6, half the regular cost, plus a limited edition tote bag. You get home delivery of the print edition each week, along with unlimited access to NewYorker.com, which includes 10 to 15 exclusive site-only stories every day. This deal also includes app access, online archives dating back to 1925, crossword puzzles, and more. Get 12 weeks of the New Yorker for just $6, plus the limited edition tote at NewYorker.com/majority. You will save 50% when you enter the code majority at checkout. So again, NewYorker.com/majority, and then majority in the checkout coupon code. Also, one of the things that brought Mile and I together, this is even before COVID, but we're doing a lot of this now. I wish I could double up on it. You can take advantage of this time at home. Break out Hunt a Killer. It's a murder mystery game that gets sent to you each month, and it's like a new episode every week of a murder until you solve it. It's a good way to switch up things from watching TV and getting kids off the screens. It reinvents the way we interact with murder mysteries. So you go from a viewer watching this safe in the comfort of your own home to an investigator actively involved in solving the case. The subscription box has over 2,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot. Each delivery, you'll sift through piles of documents, evidence, audio recordings, and case files, eliminating suspects until you crack the case. You can even join Hunt a Killer's spoiler-free community. It has 100,000 members, so they give you a little bit of clues and theories, and you can talk about it. You can get deep, deep, deep into this, believe me. Plus, part of the proceeds for every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation. Like I say, Mile and I love it. We left the board back in Brooklyn, but we're still playing it hard. It's the beauty about this. It's like it's reminiscent of, it's not D&D, but you're deep involved in this. And you get to test out theories. The thing I like about it is that we can actually have conversations about stuff, during breakfast, or wherever. I don't know. We don't eat breakfast that often together, but during lunch or dinner or just in passing, I had a thought about this. I had a thought about that guy. Right now, for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority and use promo code majority at checkout for 20% off your first box. Head to huntakiller.com/majority, 20% off now. Show support for our podcast. That's huntakiller.com/majority. And lastly, all this week, we are sponsored by Sunset Lake CBD. This is they're listeners of the show, fans of the show. TJ sent me a bunch of stuff to test. Matt, I want you to jump in here because Matt is the connoisseur. For me, it's been all about the tincture. But let me just tell you a little bit. They're located in Vermont, outside of Burlington. Huge Bernie folks, too, incidentally. It was a former family-owned dairy farm, which produced milk for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. In 2018, they decided to diversify, and they've been growing hemp for CBD, no pesticides. They use organic fertilizer. You can come and view the third-party tests for results of all their products at Sunset Lake CBD. They sent me a bunch of stuff. All of it was certified. They also have amazing business practices. Minimum wage is $15 an hour. Employees own the majority of the company. And This is basically, I mean, Matt can give you a good sense of what the smoke in the CBD is, but I've got some here. First of all, it smells amazing. Mila came into my office. She's like, Dad, what are you doing? Yeah, that pot out in your bureau. I'm like, it's not pot. It's CBD. And the thing that's nice about it is I've used 2 of the products so far. I haven't smoked any of this stuff. I'm going to soon. But I can tell you from the tincture, I've been sleeping awesome. I've had it now for almost like 10 days, the 750 milligrams. I take one teaser like 15 minutes before I go to bed. What do you call it? Those little squirty things. I've been sleeping like a baby. And their CBD infused coffee. It's like a nice Sunday morning type of thing for me. I mean, I can't, because I need to be revved up and I can't be calm during the week. That's not healthy for me. But it's been amazing, all of it. And, you know, I don't know, Matt, I know you're very skeptical about the CBD, but why don't you tell us how you've been using it?
Yeah, I was actually a big CBD skeptic. I had a bad experience when I was in Los Angeles last year, but as you can see, I have some of the special sauce here. I have
left of that.
I have smoked some of it. I'm glad they sent me a lot of it. Actually, they sent me a ton of this stuff. But I must say, for sleeping, this is my main use for it. I think it is a really nice. It's like a nice body high, I guess they call it, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not psychoactive.
That's the point, right?
Yeah. If you're somebody who gets like paranoid on other substances, for instance, this probably won't have the same effect because it's not activating the same thing. It's a completely different thing. But like you said, I was very skeptical of CBD. I was not very optimistic about this. But I mean, I don't know if this is just more if they just have a better process or something or whatever. All the pesticide-free farmer-owned Vermont growth, but it turned me into a complete believer into CBD. All
right, well, save some more of that.
There you go.
Don't blow it all now. Folks, go to sunsetlakecbd.com, sunsetlakecbd.com. Use the coupon code left is best for 20% off. Left is best for 20% off at Sunset Lake CBD. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Be right back with Nathan Tankus. We are back. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Nathan Tankus. He is the research director of the Modern Money Network. Here to Nathan, I appreciate your coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've been, I know that what you were doing prior to COVID-19 had to do with looking into the sort of the monetary policy that would be behind a Green New Deal. You shifted over to talking about the response, the Fed's response to COVID-19. I don't know what we would call this from an economic perspective, but the fallout from a pandemic, I guess. And I know that you're not an economist per se, but your research on this has been, you're getting quite a bit of acclaim for the work you're doing, and you're used to speaking to people who are very well versed in economics. Well, today you're going to elementary school for the rest of us. But before we get there, I mean, let's start with just, why don't you just tell us what the Modern Money Network is, and just tell folks about like the post-Keynesian, school of thought of money.
Yeah, sure. So the Modern Money Network is a nonprofit, a 501c3 that's focused on education around money and economics, especially the interrelations between economics and law from a kind of macro perspective, looking at money, looking at employment, looking at price stability, focusing on these kind of big macroeconomic issues, and education around money that there tends to be not very much around. Like money is a kind of subject that we live our whole day talking about, but it's the mechanics of it, how it works in the plumbing behind the scenes, isn't something that is necessarily taught at any level, all the way down from elementary school, high school, all the way up to undergraduate, law school, graduate school. And the Modern Money Network started at Columbia Law School as a way of generating education around money and finance, and thinking that money and macroeconomics was something that was important for everyone to know about, but especially the people who essentially design the system, lawyers.
Right. And so the idea being that, I guess more, sort of lay people on some level, or theoretically, I mean, the thing that we see a lot is where people just freak out and say they're printing money out of thin air, as opposed to what?
Yeah, exactly. There's a perpetual shock at how the system works at a very basic level. And, I think that, we have so little literacy around money that, if you ask a lot of people, about half of them would think that the money that is out there is backed by a bunch of gold at Fort Knox. And the more you probably get more education about how money works, like from Bond movies, than you do in any other part of your life. And that's, not exactly a great education in terms of how money works. And so we have these perpetual forgetting, and then every crisis, suddenly there's a lot of attention on what the Federal Reserve is doing and what Congress is doing, and suddenly there's this sudden realization and all these questions around these issues, and then a forgetting. And the Modern Money Network was founded after the Great Financial Crisis, to try to keep that flame alive and try to put out their materials on educating about money, so that people have more of a money literacy when these big crises happen.
And we should say, I mean, this is associated with the modern monetary theory, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. They were all close colleagues of a set of economists, Professor Stephanie Kelton, Scott Fulweiler, and so on, and many others. Definitely associated and closely working with them, but also a focus, a little bit more of a focus on the legal side, on the legal analysis of things, and on and kind of expanding out this project to be more interdisciplinary and more deeply rooted in law.
Okay, and folks can go back, and if they Google Majority Report Stephanie Kelton, we've had her on 3 or 4 times. And we've gone through the specifics of this. It was years ago, but still obviously the same. And all right, so let's just talk about, just give us a sense of what is money. I mean, let's just start with there, and then and then we'll get into sort of what the Fed has been doing, and what is new that the Fed is doing that they haven't done before, and what the implications are. But just give us this basic understanding of what money is, and go slow through the parts with the accounting.
Yeah. So at the most basic level, money is a tax credit. It's a tool that we use to settle our obligations with the government. You show up, you have a fine, a fee, or you have a tax bill. You have to pay that in something. And this is a step that's so obvious that we overlook it, but it's actually kind of everything. It's crucially important. Whatever you can pay your taxes with, makes that thing that you can pay your taxes with really valuable. You can pay your taxes with pigs. Pigs are suddenly really valuable. You can pay your taxes with chickens. Chickens are suddenly really valuable. So at this most fundamental level, money, what is money, is something that you can settle your obligations with, whether it's the court, whether it's the state, whether it's another private actor, but it's all determined by legal systems. A court says what you can pay your obligation with. A court, adjudicates, a contract dispute and says, what is an appropriate way to settle this contract between two people. So from MMT's view, from the modern monetary theory view, it's that ability to settle obligations that makes something money, or the ability to convert whatever item you have into something that you can pay your taxes with, essentially.
All
but
right.
Also fines, fees, court judgments.
So just to be clear here, in this also, and this is for my libertarian friends, this comes from an entity having a monopoly of force and saying and decreeing, this is how we're going to settle we're going to impose debts on you, taxes, and like you say, fees and other things like that from the government. And this is the only thing, or one of the things, this is what we will take to call us even here. And so without taxes, and I guess presumably fees and whatnot, but without government obligations in terms of what we must pay to the government in some fashion or another, the money we would have has no value. It becomes like a cryptocurrency, which has value only to the extent that people will buy it in the same way that like baseball cards do. Or those puka shells at when you go to like a all-encompassing, vacation place or something like that, and you can use it at the bar. It's only where, they agree on some level, right? But in terms of universality within a society, and in certain instances outside of the society, it's just a function of what the government will take to square your debts with the government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
it's whatever you can use to get even.
Right. And that concept of getting even becomes really important in this concept of accounting, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because the other fundamental thing about these relations is that one entity's or person's IOU is another person's asset. So that, whether it's cash in your hand or a government security, that item is something that is an IOU. It's a debt of the government and an asset to us. It's something we hold. It's something that's worth money to us, but it's a debt to them. The difference is, our debts, don't generally have a lot of money in it. I usually can't, pay someone by just writing a Tankus IOU and saying, I love, nice, great 5-star restaurant you have. I love this meal. Here's my IOU. Enjoy that. But with the government, you essentially do have that. A government can't just emit a bunch of IOUs. It can send out checks that you get a nice little balance statement, but all that balance statement really tells you is that you have some IOUs from the government, but you're happy with that because you can pay your taxes, you can pay court judgments, and ultimately because all these sets of payments are denominated in dollars, other people who sell goods and services also accept dollars. So it's accepted everywhere.
Will you make that a government IOU? Will you make that more tangible? Like, when do we see a government IOU?
You mean, when do we first see it?
No, but I mean, when do, like in the course of our daily lives? Like what?
You open your pocket. If you open your pocket, you take out a note right now, and it will say the Federal Reserve note. It'll be signed by a Federal Reserve official and a Treasury official, and it will say that it's accepted for all obligations, public and private. At the most basic level, the physical cash in your pocket is an IOU of the federal government. And
the federal government, just like basically issues these IOUs, and they become valuable to trade because the government ultimately is going to require something of value from everybody you're giving it to or could give it to. And therefore, it never actually has to be anything other than a promise to pay, because ultimately you're paying it back to the government. And the government is like, yeah, our promise to pay, we're going to pay ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. It relies on there's this whole set of payments that you can settle in dollars, so it never has to offer you anything else. It doesn't need to offer you, we'll give you this nice shiny object if you turn it in. It gives you, we'll settle your tax bill and we won't put you in jail, or you'll be able to settle your debt with your ex-wife or whatever it is. It gives you the ability to settle whatever obligations that you encounter in the society that are court ordered and such. And that is so valuable to people. In fact, it's so valuable that we hoard it, that we accumulate as much as we can for fear of whatever future obligations or expenses that we're going to encounter in the future.
Okay. And so will you just tell us the relationship between debt and savings? Because I want to just get all these basics sort of like tenets down before we go into what the Fed is doing, because I think it'll help, to make sure that we're all on the same sort of page, as it were. Sure.
And so the corollary of all this, that, the government's IOU is our assets, is that, at an aggregate level, for every financial asset is also in turn someone's financial obligation. So as a result, when the government runs a deficit, when the government spends more than it takes in, there must be corresponding surpluses out there, whether it's households or businesses or state and local governments or the rest of the world. Someone has to be getting more dollars than they're giving up, essentially, if the federal government is deficit spending. So that's always money in someone's pocket, always increasing someone's level of financial assets when the government runs a deficit, and vice versa. And the flip side is when the government is running a surplus, usually that means we're running deficits. So if we're spending much more than we're taking in, when the Federal Reserve, when the federal government is running a surplus, that surplus is literally taking money out of our pockets.
Okay, so all right. Now I really want to slow down even on this, and because those words I can remember those words, and I've stated them myself, but I really want people to understand this for sure, from a conceptual standpoint. So the government borrows money, and it has debt, and it spends more than it has, right? Like how it's spending, it's not spending more than it has, because it really has an unlimited potential, I guess, right? Of money, theoretically. And it's spending more than it has because it's spending more than it's taken in from its citizenry, right? And let's just say it that way for ease, but even though the US government probably takes in money like, I'm taking in fees from non-citizens, whatever. But let's just say that it's taking in, and it's spending more than it's taken in, and it's doing that by either printing the money or by just simply issuing IOUs by some other form, like, not necessarily verbal, but some other instrument that doesn't look like cash. It could be just we have an electronic IOU, and that tender is we just put it in your bank account. So boom, your numbers are up because we have a relationship with the bank. So, and that's what it means when they're spending money they don't have, that there's that much more savings on the other side, because the equilibrium is what the government takes in from its citizens and then spends it out. If it takes in 10 and it spends out 10, there's an equilibrium. But if it takes in 10 and spends out 20, that extra 10 has to be somewhere. And it necessarily, if it's not with the government, has to be with the citizens.
Yeah. I mean, that at the most fun level, that's true. There's some complicated stuff with the rest of the world, but if you just take, say like there's an isolated, just take one country, forget about the rest of the world. That government spends $1,000 and collects $900 in taxes. Some person or group of people have to have collectively $100 left over. That's right. Just, cash they have on hand or money in a bank account that they have on hand. There has to be some surplus that people have that corresponds to the federal government's deficit. And so fundamentally, if we want to accumulate financial assets, if we want to make sure that we have a bunch of savings that can protect us in a crisis, and not be so deep in debt ourselves, then then the federal government probably is going to be the one that has to deficit spend in order in order for there to be money in our pockets, or collectively, the corporate America and households all together, something like that has to be the case.
All right, now I just want to go through the other way where the government has a surplus. That means that they take in $900, and instead of spending $1,000 and instead of spending $900, they only spend $800. So the government has tightened its belt, as it were, and now they have an extra $100. But that extra $100 means that there's $100 less circulating around in the private sector, and that means that people had to go into debt. Somebody had to, or maybe, everybody had to go into debt by a penny or whatever, 0.001 of a penny or something to pay their bill to the government.
They have to, absolutely. Usually they have to collectively get into more debt to pay. There's some unique time periods where people have just so much cash that the government running a surplus just takes cash out of their hands rather than putting them into debt. Like, for example, after World War II, the deficits were so big in World War II that when you had a couple periods where they ran surpluses, and when the federal government ran surpluses in the 1940s or early 50s or whatever, what that did was just took cash that people had accumulated during the war.
There was so much slack. There was so much slack in the system that it just basically was working on slack and then ultimately tightened up. Okay.
But that slack went away over the decades. I mean, that's like one of these big conceptual points, is that we had these huge deficits during World War II where everyone essentially accumulated cash, had a bunch of money on hand, whether they were businesses or corporations, and that gave the system a lot of flexibility, times when the federal government could run surpluses and it wasn't going to cause huge problems. But over time, that period faded. We kept on having these periods where we ran relatively small budget deficits, and over time, the private sector got more and more into debt, and we reached the high private debt levels that we did eventually in the great financial crisis and after.
Okay, and so and then one other point here, and I just want to make sure that we make a distinction between sort of tax policy, as it were, and the idea of like of taxation, because the government doesn't need to tax to spend money. And we've just said they can basically just issue IOUs, and that's what they do. They don't need the money to issue the IOUs. But taxing is really about making sure that the money has value. If there were no taxes and the government required no taxes and no fees from us, then all of a sudden the money we would just rely on the fact that everybody agrees we're going to spend this, but then eventually people would start catching on, going like, wait a second, we don't need dollars to pay taxes. Maybe these, the cedar bills are good, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we should also say that taxation is a way of you can deal with like wealth inequality or whatnot. And this is
absolutely.
We're talking about the federal taxes here, because when we talk about state and local taxes, that doesn't have an impact. That doesn't have implications for monetary policy, because in the same way, because they're just subsidiaries of the federal government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Though the big thing I would say, though, is that state and local governments are something that the federal government has to take into account when they're deciding on their spending policy, on their tax policy, because people might look at the federal government number and be like, oh, that deficit, it's so big. But generally, usually, outside of huge crises like this, state and local governments are running surpluses, and the Federal Reserve, the federal government has to offset for that. That it has to, if the state and local governments are running surpluses, then the deficit that the federal government runs has to be even larger in order for you and I to, experience surpluses, or the businesses to experience surpluses. And that's, that's the huge problem right now, is that these, because tax revenues have collapsed across the board, state and local governments have lost all this money. They need money directly from the federal government to get them out of their fiscal troubles.
Okay, and so let's just be clear: we have fiscal and monetary policy. These are two basically. They're related, but they're not the same. Will you just make that distinction clear to people, because we're going to be talking about monetary policy as opposed to fiscal policy, right, in this conversation for the most part.
Yeah. So fiscal policy is exactly what we've just been talking about: spending and taxing. It's what gives us surpluses. If the government runs a deficit, we get a surplus, as we've just been talking about. Monetary policy is different, because monetary policy doesn't directly, affect whether people are running surpluses or deficits. Instead, monetary policy is about the terms at which they can finance their debts or finance their deficit. Monetary policy is, we're going to buy a whole bunch of government bonds to lower interest rates. Monetary policy, as we'll be talking about, is we're going to buy a whole bunch of bonds from the corporate sector to lower the interest rate that they pay and make sure they have access to finance. Monetary policy is, we can buy the debts of state and local governments to make sure that they lower the interest rate that they pay, and that they can find finance. But that isn't mean that they don't have, that they suddenly have a surplus when they did have a deficit. When you conduct monetary policy, when you do these purchases and sales, instead it's just affecting the financing, which is important, but it can't replace lost income. And that'll be previewing something we'll talk a lot more about, is that you can have all the monetary policy in the world, but if a company has lost a whole ton of income and has a big deficit, the monetary policy won't make that deficit go away.
Right. It might keep you afloat for a while, but at one point you're going to have to deal with it. Yeah. All right. And just to be clear, broadly speaking, Congress deals with fiscal policy, and the Fed deals with monetary policy.
Exactly.
And but there's also a relationship between the Treasury and the Fed that begins to sort of arguably blur that line a little bit.
Yeah. So I would say, I just described monetary policy as purchase and sale policy, where you purchase financial assets and you sell financial assets out there. Well, the Treasury, not when it spends or taxes, or it was involved in the spending and taxing process, doesn't blur those lines. But when it engages in sales, when it sells financial assets, it absolutely is blurring that line. And the big time that they do that is when they sell Treasury securities. That process where you're selling Treasury securities, and there's a whole bunch of net issuance out there, that's affecting interest rates for if they sell 10-year bonds, that affects interest rates for 10-year bonds. And the Federal Reserve has to respond. And so, if the Federal Reserve selling a Treasury security is monetary policy, then, arguably, I would make the case that the Treasury doing that is monetary policy. And it leads to some complications, because the Treasury thinks of its job mainly as, financing federal spending, as making sure that the federal government can make its bills. And so it uses these Treasury securities to do that, because that's the main instrument, outside of a couple others we could name, that it can use to do that. But the Federal Reserve Reserve thinks of it as a monetary policy instrument. It thinks of it as these bonds as a way to affect interest rates, and that leads to some tension. There's been conflicts over the decades between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury over their different outlooks over how they should deal with Treasury security.
Okay, so and just to be, let me just reduce this down so that I can understand it. When we say Treasury security, we're talking about, generally speaking, like bonds. We're going to borrow money, and the way we're going to borrow money is we're going to sell, Janet and Steve a bond for $100 that they're going to give Sam for his bar mitzvah. And in 20 years, it'll be worth $100. They paid $75. We're going to give them interest. So basically, they're giving us a loan, the government a loan, and we're going to pay it back with interest in 20 years. And Sam's going to get this like a little bond. Obviously, the bonds are a little bit bigger and they get sold to other people, but that's the dynamic that's going on there. And when the Treasury starts to sell these bonds, they set interest rates on them, and they'll do them at different terms. This will be, $100 in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. And that impacts how much money is out there because it allows the government to deficit spend, and that adds a surplus in the private sector. And therefore, it begins to implicate monetary policy that the Feds, it's sort of like the Feds arena. So it's like Fed's a big bank, but the Treasury is such a big client that they can impact it. Is that it?
Yeah, a little bit. One thing I would say there is that, I would separate the selling of the Treasury security from the deficit. So, that the selling the Treasury security is, will potentially enable them to deficit spend at a later time, or, meet payments at a later date. But the selling of the Treasury security itself doesn't affect those balances out there. They sell a Treasury security to the private sector. The private sector say, hands over cash or hands over a bank deposit, whatever it is. That's exchange of one financial asset for another. Nothing happens in terms of deficits or surpluses. It's only later when the federal government goes out and spends that it's running a deficit. And that's important because we can, as I've been writing a lot about recently, we can rearrange these relationships. We can say, this is stupid. Why are we having the Treasury be responsible for it, for issuing this instrument? Because the Federal Reserve should really be in charge of selling bonds, because it's the one that's concerned about interest rates. It's the one that wants to set certain interest rates on a 10-year bond or a 20-year bond. It's the one that was worried about how many 10-year bonds are circulating in the private sector. It's the one that wants to manage all these processes, and what it would do to choose to do that is different than what the Treasury would choose. And while from the Treasury's point of view, it's looking at this as, the national debt that it's using to finance itself. But the Federal Reserve and the financiers that the Federal Reserve interacts with is looking at a Treasury security and saying, this is the safest asset in the world. If I want to put $100 million somewhere and I want to guarantee that I'm not going to lose my money, what I want to do is buy a Treasury security. I can't put it in a bank because the bank has insurance, has deposit insurance caps. So my big option, if I want to make sure that I have $100 million and I'll have $100 million in 20 years, is by buying a bond. And that role of being a safe asset, of being, providing something to investors, is what the Federal Reserve really cares about. And, the decisions it would make would be different than the Treasury would make. And in the meantime, as we can talk about in a bit, everyone gets very confused or gets worried about the national debt, and it isn't thinking about it the way the financiers and the central bankers are thinking.
And the reason why I think that my $100 billion is going to be there in 20 years is because the U.S. government has the ability to tax a massive population, essentially, that is highly productive. And that makes it the safest bet in the world. Is that basically it?
And that it's then not only that, but you can that the federal government will create dollars and absolutely make its payments no matter what. That you can rely on the federal government is going to make its payments, and the money you get at the end of that process is going to be valuable because of the system of payments that are denominated in dollars. There's so many countries around the world that owe dollars, and corporations and banks around the world that owes dollars. There's a huge population within the United States that owes dollars in all these different ways, that you can rely not just that some bureaucrat is going to quote unquote print money and provide you money, but that money is probably going to have still be valuable 10, 20 years down the line.
All right. And lastly, I mean, just this idea, that the people, in the wake of the financial crisis, I remember going on TV with David Stockman, who was the Office of Budget Management Director under Reagan. And he would come on and he would say, PIMCO, which is the biggest bond buyer, I guess, or one of the biggest bond buyers in the country, is selling their bonds, and the by July we're going to have rampant inflation, and I think this was in 2010 or 11, I can't remember when it was, and everything's going to crash, and there's going to be inflation, and people won't want to buy our bonds anymore. And so when you say that, when people like that are worried about stuff, they're not looking at it in the way that investors do, because none of those things happened. I mean, Glenn Beck and there was a whole industry out there telling us that we were going to turn into the Weimar Republic because of quantitative easing and whatnot, which is, and none of that happened. So
the people who bet against Treasury securities lost a lot of money.
And okay, so with all that said, tell us what the Fed has been doing now and what it needs to do going forward from your perspective. There have been three major, as far as I can tell from reading you and obviously reading the news, there have been three major things that the Fed has done, some of which is sort of radically new for the Fed. That's the Main Street Lending Program, the Paycheck Protection Liquidity Facility, and the Municipal Liquidity Program. And then you also talk a lot about alternative accounting. Let's start with, I don't know, which one of those do you want to start with that makes it easiest for you?
I think the three big ones are what I would say is, instead of the paycheck protection one, it's the corporate credit facilities.
Okay,
There's
right.
These two corporate credit facilities. And those, so that's the big picture. The big picture is the Fed is experimenting with something which isn't completely unprecedented in its history, but is pretty rare, which is direct lending to small and medium-sized businesses. The Main Street Lending Program, it's got these corporate credit facilities, which is also pretty unprecedented for them, which is buying corporate bonds, both on the secondary market, meaning from private financiers who are holding them or speculating on them, and directly from corporations. And then the third one is the Municipal Liquidity Facility, which is buying state and local government securities. And all of these, in some degree or another, are pretty unprecedented for the Fed. But the Main Street Lending Program is the biggest one. Is definitely the biggest kind of outside, where it's the most uncomfortable.
Okay, so I want to just say this too. This is not a substitute, obviously, for fiscal. Well, it can have some substitution, I guess, effects, but we're focusing on this. But we should also say that obviously there needs to be fiscal actions too. Congress needs to support support people as well in spending. But we're just focusing on this with the Fed right now because our government is completely incapable of getting its crap together on some level, and there's more independence by the Fed, it seems like. And so
that's the big picture here. The big picture here is monetary policy would have a role in this crisis, but the focus on it and how much it's doing relative to how much Congress and the rest of the federal government is doing is completely lopsided. The fundamental problem from a macroeconomic point of view, the fallout from the virus is that a whole bunch of businesses and households and also state and local governments have lost a tremendous amount of income because we've quote unquote shut down the economy, because we've shut down these public spaces, because a whole ton of people have lost their jobs, and the knock-on effects from that, millions upon millions upon millions, unprecedented level of job losses in the last 2 months. And that process, the thing that we ultimately need to deal with that problem is income. And as we've just been talked about, when the federal government runs a deficit, the rest of the economy runs a surplus, we need a much bigger deficit to offset those income losses. And cash in your pocket, which they've already done a little bit, but much more on a much grander scale than they're already contemplating. But because we've had a politics around for decades and decades around deficits being the worst thing in the world, you got to try to balance the budget. Whenever it comes down to a crisis and Congress spends, it doesn't spend at the scale of what the crisis needs. It spends on what balancing, seeming like it's doing a lot with the political concerns about the deficit further down the line. And that's our kind of big problem right now, is that they're doing things like with the payroll protection program, which is supposed to be essentially direct grants directly to small businesses. It's capping that, and it's capping that not for any economic reason why it makes sense for only $400 billion or $710 billion to go out the door. It's capping that because politically, it's very hard for them to wrap their mind around an uncapped program where first come first serve and everyone gets money.
And we should say what that is the functional equivalent of, it seems to me, is just sort of like holding your breath when you go by a cemetery, or literally it's superstition, right? I mean, it's just like learned superstition, because Nancy Pelosi, I don't know, was friends with Pete Peterson, and then was espousing PAYGO. They look at a messaging bill, right, which doesn't even spend money, because they know it's not going to spend money, and they're still afraid to have it go over. Like, they're still saying stuff like, we're nervous about, how much money we're spending after $3 trillion. I mean, not all this is an abstraction. It's literally like, 1,000 years ago, people said you couldn't go into the forbidden zone, and nobody remembers why. And it turns out, it was just something that folklore.
These are just big numbers that are scary, even though there's no context in terms of how the economy works or macroeconomics. It's just these big numbers are bigger than I can imagine, and we don't spend time really thinking about macroeconomics and thinking about the scale at which macroeconomics functions on. So suddenly, when it comes time that we need to spend a whole bunch of money, people can't wrap their heads around how much money we're talking about, or the scale that we're talking about. And that's the kind of big problem, is that we have these, once a decade or once 20 years, we suddenly, have to talk about this, and everyone has to learn a lot all at once. And it necessarily seems scary, and, can we really do it that big, and so on and so forth. And that's the big problem. So the Federal Reserve is stepping into that void of the rest of the government not responding. So, for example, the program we were just talking about, Main Street Lending Program, that program would not have to exist if the payroll protection program was uncapped. If they provided enough money that was just, forgivable loans, grants to small businesses as needed, even medium-sized businesses, hell, all of the business sector, you wouldn't need to provide small and medium-sized size loans to basically provide a bridge loan until they can start making money again. And that's what the Main Street Lending Program is really supposed to do. But it's, obviously it's a loan. It's not the grant or forgivable loans the way the payroll protection program is supposed to be. And it has a little bit in it. It defers payment on principal and interest for a year. So it gives you a little bit of a leeway, and that's kind of in and of itself unprecedented for the Fed, but it's still nowhere near enough. And that's kind of the big, takeaway in terms of all that the Federal Reserve is doing, is the Federal Reserve is stepping into doing some fiscal policy, even though it's very uncomfortable with doing fiscal policy by, say, deferring these the principal and interest on these loans for a year, but it's not willing to go the full way because Congress hasn't fully authorized it to be a fiscal authority, but it feels compelled to do something because the rest of the federal government is missing in action.
Okay, so just to be clear, by deferring interest for a year, and does that interest accumulate over the course of that year, or does the interest start accruing a year out?
I would have to recheck, but I believe that the interest starts accruing from the time of the loan.
Okay, and so by deferring it for a year, though, it is as if it is spending the money. So it's sort of like just pretending to be, it's doing this sort of mutated version of fiscal policy, but in fact it's monetary because it's a financial instrument, but it's deferring the financial the financial aspects of it for a year. So there's one free year of money. You have to start paying for that money a year out, but presumably like it's like the equivalent of a 20-year loan, but it's actually 21 years to pay it back, essentially.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's to make up for the fact that there's been such an anemic fiscal response by the government. So when do we when does the crap hit the fan? Like, people are walking around their towns now, right? And it's hard to determine that store has closed, as opposed to it's just, taking a break because we're on pause. Like, it feels like we can't quite see the damage yet because, I've used this in the past as an analogy, like the tsunami's hit, the water's come in, and it hasn't receded enough for us to really see the damage yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, this has just been so rapid. It's been, the big picture. New York closed its, announced that it was closing its schools and basically closing down the restaurants and such, like March 12th, I think.
It was 13th was a Friday. It was actually the 16th. I mean, the last day for schools was the 13th. Yeah. It was 16th was a Monday when the closure, all that closure stuff happened.
Yeah, so that's 2 months. It's just been 2 months. I mean, think about, the financial crisis, in the great financial crisis, the anemic response taking, it was, it was clear to people in financial markets that, things were going wrong, at the very latest by March of 2008. And we didn't get, TARP, the Trouble Asset Relief Program, and, the big crisis response until the fall, until like October and November.
Right.
We didn't get the stimulus bill until a year after, like March or April of 2009. In this, I talk about the anemic congressional response, but on the scale that they're used to working on, this has been rapid. I mean, we've done multiple spending bills within, this 2-month period. Right. The Federal Reserve, of course, has announced a flurry of programs over those 2 months. So it's the shock has just been so fast and so sudden that I think people are still, it's still going to be months and months and months before people really fully have a grasp over the economic scale of this. I mean, I think most people, I don't think, are fully grasping what is going on in terms of the employment situation. I mean, we have had a staggering amount of employment losses. I mean, at this point, 30% unemployment, its peak seems optimistic. It seems like, wow, if the response really goes well, we'll get to just 30% unemployment, which is obviously Great Depression levels, worse than Great Depression levels, especially with the suddenness of the crisis. I mean, it took 2-3 years before unemployment got that high during the Great Depression, and so this the suddenness of it. I think people are going to fully realize the kind of economic damage and the destruction of people's lives that we're talking about, even beyond the deaths, 3-4 months from now. But by then, the damage will have been so much worse because we're not responding on the scale the crisis demands.
So you've looked at what the Fed is doing, and the biggest problem is that we're having on the fiscal side. What can the Fed? Is there anything else that what else can the Fed do at this point without having sort of the fiscal component?
I think the big thing is on the state and local government side. About May 11th, so a week ago, the Fed put out like a pricing on the municipal liquidity facility, basically the interest rates that state and local governments could borrow directly from the Fed, and the pricing is very unattractive. You have to pay interest rates well above short-term the current operating level of short-term interest rates in order to borrow from the Federal Reserve using the municipal liquidity facility. If you're below investment grade, remember these are state and local governments. It's not like these are businesses. So just because a government has a worse credit rating, and by the way, a credit rating from a private company doesn't mean that the Federal Reserve shouldn't provide support, but it's talking about charging interest rates basically like 6% above the going overnight interest rates between private actors if you're a below investment grade municipality who wants to borrow. And I think the Federal Reserve is a federal government entity. These are state and local governments. We're in the middle of a crisis. They should be lending on a preferential basis, not on a high interest rate basis on the theory that these entities aren't creditworthy because they're state and local governments that are responding to a public health crisis. I personally think that these facilities should be uncapped, that you should be able to borrow as much as you want from the Federal Reserve for the duration of the crisis at zero interest rates or at say like 0.5% interest rate, and the Federal Reserve should commit to holding all the debt and not reselling any of the debt that they've purchased from state and local governments for the duration of the crisis and some amount of years after the crisis, say 5 years or so forth. That because you can argue all sorts of things about buying and lending and the economic effects, but loosening the financial constraints, making sure that that state and local governments don't have to worry about the bills, literally saves lives now. If you told them guaranteed you can spend as much as you want and you're not going to go into bankruptcy, then state and local governments could spend as needed, and that can potentially save thousands of lives.
Why do you think the Fed is? Why do you think Powell and I guess the other the federal board? Why do you think that they're making this decision? Why are they being so I guess chintzy when it comes to state and municipalities?
Historically, the Federal Reserve has been most uncomfortable above everything else with quote unquote picking winners and losers. They don't want to be seen as picking winners and losers, and they've obviously, at a certain level, are picking winners and losers right now when they're choosing between,
of course,
money that you give non-financial corporations, money you give state and local governments, and so on and so forth. They are, and they're grudgingly acknowledging that, but they're very uncomfortable with it. And so I think they are trying to kind of limit it as much as possible. Okay, we're doing this, but we're charging high interest rates. We're giving the best credit to the most credit-worthy companies, and they're trying to find all these outs to go, yes, we're picking winners and losers, but, and to justify, to excuse it, to minimize what they're doing, and to doing something. When I'm talking about doing, you have to lean in. You have to say, yes, I'm picking winners and losers, and the people I don't want to lose are state and local governments right now because they are on the front lines of fighting this crisis, and that's that is a very uncomfortable position for them. The other thing is they're worried about losses. They're worried about the politics of, say, losing $50 billion or whatever because of quote unquote defaults from state and local governments. They're worried about that, like, sort of conventional credit worthiness thing as as well, we're stepping a little bit into fiscal policy, but we don't want too much. And that's why they've gone through all these rigmarole, all these accounting gimmicks of, well, we're going to do these facilities, but we want $500 billion from the Treasury that will cover the losses from these facilities. And this kind of, accounting gimmick thing, when it's just, within the federal government, is something that they feel like gives them political cover. And, I'd be telling them to forget about that political cover and just do it and respond to the crisis at the scale it needs, because, they have that responsibility.
Just to be clear, who is the political cover from? I mean, is this a function of the White House not wanting to fund states, states and municipalities because they want to put pressure on these states and municipalities? Is it pressure from, I don't know, super wealthy people who don't want their if other people are doing okay, it necessarily devalues their wealth, right? I mean, because it's a dynamic.
I think that primarily it is definitely Republican Congress people who, rake the Federal Reserve over the coals whenever they do any sort of intervention. But also, in fairness a bit, I think probably also worried about some Democratic Congress people, because the flip side of this, of like you respond to the crisis, and go all out, is that that does involve some stepping out of the bounds of their congressional mandate. At the very least, it's stretching it. And there are people on the Democratic side that are just as worried about the Federal Reserve stepping by on its ambit. And there is a real danger that as Congress inadequately responds to recurring crises and the Federal Reserve expands its ambit more and more, that we essentially put all economic policy into the Fed, and we have very little democratic accountability over what's being done. So I think that there is probably also a little bit of concern. I can easily imagine a Democratic congressperson saying, "I'm glad that you were able to respond in this crisis and do this thing, and it ultimately is a good thing, but I am worried about how much power that we're putting into your hands, and about the what it means for democracy that you are taking. The Federal Reserve as an entity, as an agency, is taking all this increasing power for itself to be the ones who pick winners and losers. So I think that there probably is a concern on both sides of the aisle, and definitely also a concern that the bigger that they respond to a crisis, the danger that more of their tools get taken away.
Right.
That what if they respond to a municipal and state government budget crisis so big that tool is taken away explicitly by Congress, and thus they can't, ever help municipal and state governments to any degree. So while, I ultimately think that they should go for it, I do think that there are some, I understand the political considerations that makes them reluctant to go that way. But I think, for example, in how unfavorable the pricing on the municipal liquidity facility, I don't think that's really justified. I think, they can make that a much more accessible, much better priced facility with lower interest rates, and get away with it, quote unquote, in terms of Congress. And I suspect that, in fact, that they're going to get a lot of criticism for how unfavorably these facilities are priced.
Nathan Tankus, research director from the Modern Money Network. Thank you so much for walking us through this. I have a feeling, this is obviously we need this education to understand what's going to be happening and what's not going to be happening going forward. And appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks. Going to take a quick break, head into the fun half of the program. Before we do, reminder, I am super excited to introduce to you, and you've actually been introduced, but I reintroduced to you one of the coolest sponsors we've ever had, Hunt a Killer. It's a murder mystery subscription box, one of the most unique games out there, brings the fun of an escape room. I've never done that. But I guess, I don't know, now I'm intrigued by an escape room for that matter, but that's not going to happen for a while.
I watched the escape room movie, and it's actually better than I thought. So this is even more interesting to me now than before.
Well, go to huntakiller.com/majority. Use the promo code majority at checkout. You get 20% off your first box. In the box, you're going to get all sorts of like documents and a couple of photos. It's huntakiller.com/majority with promo code majority. Just a reminder, it's your memberships that help this program chug along. When you become a member, you get the fun half free of commercials. We are, we used to have a limit on how many commercials we would do in the the free half. But obviously, because of the squeeze, we are making the hay while the sun is shining, as it were. But if you become a member, you don't have to listen to any ads, and you support the program, and you support other folks who are having financial difficulties at this time. And there's going to be more of that where that came from, sadly. So join the MajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget, AM Quickie still chugging along. Check it out. Subscribe at amquickie.com. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. I am drinking some as we speak. That is the Bike Fuel. I'm mixing it up. Los Diosos, Bike Fuel, Majority Report blends, mixing them all. I'm not mixing them together. Wouldn't want to do that, but I am, one day this, one day that, just to the spice of life, ladies and gentlemen. Also, don't forget, tomorrow night, TMBS. Matt, do you know who's going to be on the Michael Brooks show tomorrow night?
I think Big Waz, and I'm not sure who the other guest is, but I'll know tomorrow, but I'm excited. I think Waz.
Big Waz, my favorite guest on TMBS.
Waz Nilambre, yep. He's my favorite podcaster, I think, so I'm excited for him to be back.
I mean, as opposed to...
Yeah, of course.
Right. So check that out. You can find Michael Brooks show on YouTube. Also, the Nomiki show. You can find that on patreon.com. The Nomiki show. Nomiki will be with us tomorrow. You can find her on YouTube at Nomiki Const on YouTube. And not 100% sure what she's got going this week, but we will ask her about that tomorrow. And Jamie.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going over there?
It's going. What's happened on the Intifada this week?
Oh, well, this week on the Intifada, we have a fresh episode of History as a Weapon. Actually came out last week, but it's very good, with Sean and Matt Christman, wherein they talk about the terminal decline of U.S. hegemony, our current crisis and everything that's going on with that. And they kind of freak out a little bit before kind of getting hopeful at the end. It's a beautiful journey of two men who love each other very much. So check it out. Patreon.com/TheAntifada. Also, I moderated a panel on coronavirus and the future of work. That's in our feed as well. And this week, we're going to have an episode again with my friend Heather Fortune, the amazing musician and prolific leftist shit poster. And I'm recording that today. I hate to jinx it by plugging it before I record, but knock on wood, it's going to go great.
Hope springs eternal. Matt.
Twitch.tv/literary hangover. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the fatal environment, the myth of the frontier and the age of industrialization while playing Red Dead Redemption for patrons at patreon.com/literary hangover. There's a new installment of the Orweller series, so check that out.
And we should say that our guest, Nathan Tankus, said he enjoyed the show. This is from Brendan, and he just added a Majority Report listener discount to his Substack. So you can go, we'll put the link in the podcast description, and you can go and get 20% off for Majority Report listeners over the next 10 days. So you can check that out. The description is in the podcast and the YouTube thing. That guy's on it. All right, quick break. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
we are back. Sam Cedar, fun half. IM is up. Phones are up. Let's go to Nancy Pelosi saying this. I want to compare and contrast. Now, here is Nancy Pelosi saying that all Democrats wanted economic stabilizers. What this is, and we've talked about this many times on the program, economic stabilizer basically says these programs will stay in effect until we hit certain benchmarks, or in the event that certain, I don't know, unfavorable benchmarks are hit, these things will automatically kick in. So the idea is that you don't have to go back. You're not saying like, oh, we're going to provide unemployment for 6 months for some random number of, like 6 months is completely random. It's not, it should be. We're going to provide this amount of unemployment while unemployment is still above, I don't know, 3% or 2%, 1%, 0%, whatever it is. But 6 months, the virus doesn't care. The depression doesn't care. The recession doesn't care about time. We want to know certain benchmarks. That's what automatic stabilizers are. But like we talked about with Nathan Tankus, for some reason, akin to sort of like believing in, I don't know, the boogeyman, Nancy Pelosi has a fear of a certain number. We don't know what number it is now in terms of the CBO scoring. So we couldn't put that in the messaging bill. Play this clip.
the word stabilizer.
Concerns from the progressives.
Yeah.
Stuff that was not included.
Well, we're okay with that, but in terms of the stabilizers, and that wasn't just the progressives, that's across the board in our caucus, including in the Speaker's office. I'm a big supporter of having stabilizers in the bill. For those of you, stabilizer would be something where you might have in the bill something that says, if by January the unemployment rate is 7% or higher, we would automatically have 26 weeks of unemployment checks, which is something that is really standard fare. But say you put that in a bill. I thought that would be a very wise thing to do. Same thing with FMAP, same thing with SNAP and the rest. However, what I know many years as an appropriator and in leadership did not realize, because we had never spoken in these big terms before, is that if you have a stabilizer in it, that something will happen next January, and then you'll have $400–500 billion worth of unemployment checks going out. It counts in the bill today. It counts in the bill today. Why would it? It doesn't happen, and it might not ever happen. God willing, we won't have that high unemployment rate, but we might. But the CBO, if you say people are still hungry by such and such, we want to double SNAP after the first of the year, they count it today. Now, SNAP is a much smaller program, so it's maybe you can absorb it, maybe not. But $400–500 billion you can. So we were disappointed. So we want to look and see what our legislative, constitutional, and other prerogatives might be to give us more latitude to prepare, even though not spend in the moment, but not have it count in the moment. But I myself was disappointed to learn that we just couldn't go to that place. I wanted to put hortatory language to say, let us declare that we are prepared should certain things happen. They said that's a stabilizer. So they couldn't do that. But I do think that everybody should know that the actions taken by Congress are predicated on the needs of the American people. And should there be a reason later to do that, we will be there, and we want to herald that and give that signal.
I want people to fully understand how bizarre this is. The idea, okay, so the CBO is going to actually include that as spending in the bill, even though it's conditioned upon things still being bad. So the natural question is like, so what? And it's because for some reason, Nancy Pelosi believes that if we put out a bill that says we're spending $4 trillion, remember, none of this is going to happen. This is a messaging bill. You know, it's going to put pressure maybe on the Republicans, and it's going to be something to define that the Democrats use as a bludgeon. But in her mind, if the message is we're spending $4 trillion as opposed to $3 trillion, that's a liability. I mean, they started with the number 3 trillion and then worked backwards, because 3 trillion was more than 2 trillion, but it's less than 4 trillion. This is how myopic and ossified Nancy Pelosi's thinking is about this. This is a messaging bill, and she is worried about sending the wrong message to imaginary people who have imaginary concerns about what is an imaginary number is going to be spent. This is like playtime during nursery school. Like this is all fantastical. And sorry, we couldn't guarantee that we're going to extend food stamps. Sorry, we couldn't guarantee that we're going to extend unemployment insurance in the event that it's desperately needed, because we didn't want to say $3.6 trillion. We want to say $3 trillion.
They wanted to, though, and everyone knows it's the thought that counts.
It's the thought that counts about the thought that we were talking about, right? Because this bill is not going to pass in the Senate. It's just going to put pressure on. It's just absurd. It's just absurd. Now, they did include a moratorium on the removal of the SALT deduction tax deduction to help rich people. Now, you could have had some savings there in this imaginary bill, but no. If you were so concerned about this number, but it literally is like we passed a $2 trillion bill. So we're going to do a $3 trillion. We're going to show that we want to do more, but not $3.6 trillion. But that's too much. This is just bizarre.
It's an abdication of leadership. And
It is
just blaming the CBO. It's ridiculous.
It's unbelievable. Really, what she should have said is, I never knew this, but the CBO would score this way. And I am just, you can't fight it. You can't fight the number. All right. So
it's atrocious. I am looking forward to the chopped and screwed trap version of this, though, where Nancy just says stabilizers over and over again.
Stabilizers and stabilizers. I will say this. All right. Now, look, when there was a semblance of a leadership fight at the beginning of the 2018 Congress, leading up to it, there was, as far as I could tell, no decent candidates that were stepping forward. Short of Tim Ryan was the only candidate I think that really that announced.
Seth Moulton too.
Seth Moulton. In fact, worse than Ryan in many respects. And when that was happening, I was like, look, you're going to go from the frying pan to the fire with a guy like Tim Ryan. And to a certain extent, I think that assessment at the time, I don't think it was a wrong one. Because Nancy Pelosi has gotten, I think, and maybe she was always this way and just not in the position to show it. But the tin ear has just gotten tinnier. And so, but I want to own this mistake because I do not believe that anybody could be worse. And there has been a massive failure on the progressive side of things, without a doubt. And I don't mean just the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I mean, like all the groups that ostensibly are supportive of the progressives on the outside. They've all failed in this instance to leverage power against Pelosi. I think they were surprised maybe that they had to try and do this. I don't know. So the failure is all around. Here's Tim Ryan. And again, much of this is all kabuki at this point. There's only so much power the Democrats have. But it's important to lose and build on a future victory. And the Democrats are losing and undercutting a future victory, frankly. Here's Tim Ryan on the floor. I want you to juxtapose this with Nancy Pelosi saying, well, the CBO score came in, so we can't put in automatic stabilizers, although everybody wanted to, because we're afraid that this number is going to seem too big. People get very freaked out at 3.6 trillion as opposed to 3 trillion. I'm sorry. Here's Paul Ryan doing exactly Tim Ryan doing exactly what you should be doing at this point if you are a leader of the Democratic Party, and we're not getting that. It should be performative. It should be pointing out all the problems. It shouldn't be getting up there and making excuses as to why you couldn't put in automatic stabilizers. The reason why the way you put in automatic stabilizers, you Nancy Pelosi, you say, here's $3.6 trillion. Why do we have to do this? Because we cannot trust the Republicans. So this bill looks like it's bigger than it is because we can't trust Republicans in their future actions. That's what you say. Here's Tim Ryan saying, at least spiritually, a similar thing.
I've got to tell you, this is absolutely unbelievable. Just a few years ago, the stock market's at 25,000. Corporate profits are the highest they've been in decades. The rich keep getting richer. And our friends on the other side said, what do we do now? Let's do a tax cut. where 83% of it goes to the top 1% of the wealthiest people. Fast forward a few months, global pandemic, 36 million people unemployed, 40% of families who have a worker that makes $40,000 a year and less lose their job last month. 4 million people didn't pay their rent, and the Republican Party says, we don't have any money to help you. Are you kidding me? Where do you guys live? Food lines around the blocks at our food banks in the United States of America. 1 in 5 kids are going hungry. Your party can't even get food to them. This isn't a wish list. If it's a wish list, it's for the working class people. How about the Teamsters that are going to get a pension when this bill passes?
Gentleman's time's expired.
Their pension gets cut in half.
Gentleman's time is expired.
This is ridiculous.
Gentlewoman
You're turning
from
your
New York
backs on the American
reserves.
people.
The gentleman
Let's
from
be honest.
Oklahoma.
There it is. I mean, look, again, Tim Ryan's politics are not where I want them to be. But at the very least, there is some holding to account the Republicans. You're not sitting there squabbling about $3 trillion versus $3.6 trillion. It's just an imaginary, it's just a number.
Yeah,
It's
and
unbelievable.
he's as pissed off as everyone should be right now.
Exactly. Here is what Tim Ryan in that last clip was responding to. Tim Ryan's talking about the enormous number of people unemployed, 36 million. By now, it's a little bit more. We're headed towards, depending on who you believe, somewhere between 25 and 30% unemployment. We have huge bread lines in the country, people lining up with cars, children going hungry, and it's just going to get worse. The Republicans have said, we're not doing anything. Here's Kevin McCarthy's response to the HEROES Act. And let's be clear. He's going to respond this way if it's a $1 trillion bill, a $500 million bill, a $1.5 trillion bill, a $2 trillion bill. The number doesn't make a darn difference. Here's Kevin McCarthy saying this.
It's really sickening that the Democrats are using this opportunity to enforce their socialism. Remember, what is this bill that they just passed on Friday? Well, it's about pot. It's about prisoners. It's about politicizing election law, prioritizing illegal immigrants, and pensions. These are all things that are socialist wish list that they've been trying to pass long before COVID ever came to this land.
I love the fact that they're so concerned about a mail by vote or vote by mail. First of all, there's no data that says that it supports Democrats, but just the idea that there would be that much democracy is terrifying to them. They're going to call you a socialist and say it's a socialist wish list no matter what you send. What the Democrats could have just said, we're just going to completely deregulate everything, and they would call it socialist wish list.
Yeah, this proves that.
Of course. And it's like, like who is it that Nancy Pelosi is afraid of is going to say 3.6 trillion? Come on. This thing should have been 3 trillion. I mean, give me a break. It's just ridiculous. Kevin McCarthy is just, they are doing nothing. And this is the problem with this is the problem with the White House administration response to the epidemic itself, to the pandemic. And this is the problem with the Republicans' response to the economy. Right now, The economy is in a state of shock. Right now, we have the curve, at least in the epicenter of the country, not in other places, trending down. These 2 months where everybody was staying at home, these 2 months where you had temporary fixes from the government in terms of the economy, are when you should be actually diligently working to deal with the future. And they have done none of this. None of it. Zero. And we're back to where we were 2 months ago, with now 90,000 Americans dead, 30 some odd million people out of work, and nothing. No planning for the future. None of it. There's been nothing. There's no silver lining here. It's stunning.
What's up with that? Because, obviously these people like Pelosi are beholden to moneyed interests, but it fails at even like the most basic center-left policies that should not be controversial among Democrats.
I mean, the Democrats obviously have no ability to do anything. They can only message. We would be in better shape if the Republican Senate passed this bill and Trump signed it without a doubt. But it's a messaging bill. So their failure is just strictly political. The White House has failed in terms of actually doing things. They have the power to do all these things. This new piece in the Financial Times where it talks about Jared Kushner advising Trump, don't do testing. Because if you test, you'll find out that there are cases here. And if there are cases, it's going to scare the stock market. And undoubtedly, when you read stuff like the FDA shutting down this Bill Gates initiative to create tests. Look, I want Bill Gates to just give the government the money. The government should do it. But the government's not doing it. And they're stopping other people from doing it. And why are they doing that? I'm convinced it's the same thing. They're not worried about the stock market. They want the economy to come back. So they don't want us to know about tests. I mean, Donald Trump has been saying this every day.
Yeah, he's already been saying this explicitly.
He's been saying this explicitly. Tests are no good. All it shows is that you have it. If you don't do the test, you don't have the cases. And so
like the little kid who thinks that if he can't see you, then you can't see him.
Well, no, but he's right. No, it's worse than that. Because he knows that if there are reports of less cases, people are going to go out. And he thinks, and they have thought this from day one, we will get over it. 100,000, 200,000, even 300,000, 400,000 people. They're sitting in the White House saying our society can absorb these losses. They are people who are ill. They are people who are older. For the most part, they'll die. There'll be, 2 or 3 people per person who dies is going to be upset, maybe 5. So that's 4 million people, 5 million people who are upset because these people have died. We don't need them anyways.
Yeah, their entire ideology is based on getting people insulated from this sort of thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so their enemy is not the virus. Their enemy is not the deaths that the virus could bring. Their enemy is the fear that would be associated and the concern about people dying that would prevent people from going out and engaging in economic activity. And so they think they can convince people to go out and to gamble, to do that. And maybe they're right. And we'll see what happens if the numbers catch up. May not catch up for a month, may not be, maybe 6 months. We don't know. But this is their thinking. They specifically, the reason why there weren't tests is because they specifically did not want them. They specifically did not want the tests to exist. Because they don't care how many people have it. They care about how many people think has it. It's, this is the type of thing where, the school psychologist comes back and says, hey, yeah, no, we got to take this kid out of school. He's a danger to everybody. That's what would happen. They sit down with these people. Speaking of which, this lunatic, Peter Navarro, this guy's the trade representative. He somehow is now a public health expert. There's sycophants, and then there's like sycophants. And Peter Navarro is talking about Donald Trump is the greatest president we've ever had. This is sick stuff. Here he is on Meet the Press. He's in a battle with Fauci, because Fauci is giving medical advice, and Navarro wants well, how do we? Let's just kick this around. We don't care about 300,000 deaths or 400,000 deaths. If we didn't care about that, what would we do? That seems to be what is driving his strategy.
Does the president have confidence in the CDC as our lead on this pandemic?
Well, I'd say two things about that. First of all, you should ask the president that question, not me. But early on in this crisis, the CDC, which really had the most trusted brand around the world in this space, really let the country down with the testing, because not only did they keep the testing within the bureaucracy, they had a bad test, and that did set us back. But going forward with these guidelines, the important thing to understand here for the American people is this. Opening up this economy is not a question of lives versus jobs. The fact of the matter is, and what President Trump realized early on, is that if you lock people down, you may save lives directly from the China virus.
Right.
But you indirectly are going to kill a lot more people. And why do I say that? We know statistically, based on our experience with the China trade shock in the 2000s, that unemployment creates more suicides, depression, and drug abuse. But we also know this in this crisis, as we've basically locked down our hospitals for everything but COVID, women haven't been getting mammograms or cervical examinations for cancer. We haven't been able to do other procedures for the heart or the kidneys, and that's going to kill people as well. So if you contrast this complete lockdown, where some of the people in the medical community want to just run and hide until the virus is extinguished, that's going to not only take a huge toll on the American economy, it's going to kill many more people than the China virus ever would.
This sick lunatic is out there now explaining how the experts in the medical field don't know how to do math and don't know what they're doing by focusing on COVID in this pandemic. Or I should say this not COVID, I'm sorry, the China virus that he calls it. And this is just bat crap crazy. I don't understand why they let this dude on the air and just yeah.
Yeah, Chuck Todd just, good point. Yeah.
Right.
What are you doing?
Wait a second. Wasn't the drug overdose a function of the opium epidemic that came from pharmaceutical companies?
At this point, these networks are what's your job? To launder liars into the homes of the American public on behalf of corporations? Maybe their job, but
he's talking about these things like they happen in a vacuum and are not caused by massive austerity on the part of our government for decades on end. We wouldn't be having hospital shortages if you hadn't been cutting Medicaid all these years.
Exactly. Well, I just want to know why the trade rep is on there, going out there and uncritically being able to say that more people are going to die because we are taking medical precautions around COVID-19 than would otherwise die. Because we're taking these precautions, we're creating more deaths. Just completely insane.
Well, austerity is a force of nature, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's the ideology that these people are preaching.
It's nuts. Calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Brad from Philadelphia. How are you doing today?
I'm okay, Brad. How are you?
Hanging in there. Yeah, thank you for asking. I was watching Jerome Powell last night on the 60 Minutes interview, and he said that there were no fundamental problems with the economy prior to COVID-19, and I wanted to kind of debunk that really quick and then talk about some economic data that I've been seeing during COVID-19.
Yeah, dude. Let me just add before you go into this. So Joe Wiesenthal, is that his name from who's at Business Insider? Is that it?
Bloomberg. He's at Bloomberg now, but
he's at Bloomberg. He wrote a piece the other day saying that he thinks this downturn that we're experiencing, I mean, obviously not to this degree, but there was a downturn that started in like the last quarter of 2018. But go ahead.
Okay, so I've been looking at a lot of Mark Blythe's work, and he has done the research to find that 70% of the U.S. GDP comes from consumer spending. And credit card debt had reached its highest ever levels in the summer of last year, along with there were 7 million people that were 90 days delinquent on their auto loans, and there were about 6 million homes that were already in forbearance, even before we get into the overnight repo trouble that kind of happened in, the markets in September when they were trying to like fund enough liquidity. And I think that you can look at just like a multitude of different markers that show that the consumer was like falling or just like piling up debt in order to continue like keeping the economy going. So I think that if you look into like some of that, you can find that there were many, many flaws and fundamental problems even before COVID-19. And then moving into COVID-19, I've been looking at inflation, deflation in different goods and services. So things that have deflated in cost have been apparel is down about 48.9% for women's and girls' apparel. Men's clothing is down about 43%. Footwear is down about 38%. And then if you go down
not
to
in terms of prices, you mean in terms of purchases?
No, like actual cost of the goods. So they're slashing the cost of the goods because they can't sell them. So a lot of businesses are finding they're having excess inventory. They don't have storehouses to store the inventory. There's no consumer demand to buy the goods. They make the goods cheaper. They still don't sell many of the goods. They sell them at a loss. And then my prediction of what this would mean long term would be you have a downturn in manufacturing and a multitude of layoffs because there's a glut of inventory out there that hasn't been purchased yet.
Right.
So there's also data that shows and proves this. From February to March, the savings rate in the United States climbed from 8% to 13.1%, which was the highest savings rate increase since November of 1981. So rather than people going out to spend into the economy, which is what they need us to do in order to keep it running, people are saving their money in order to prepare for downturn. So that kind of coupled with the fact that, goods are going down, I kind of just see it being like a spiral for like a lot of different industries. And then one final thing to talk about maybe would be what's going on with commercial mortgages and the commercial mortgage-backed securities. I'm seeing that in 1 month, the property values have gone down 10% for apartments, 20% for malls, 9% for offices, 15% for strip retail, and the list like kind of goes on. So I'm kind of thinking that if more people are going to be working from home, that means offices are going to continue to lose value.
Right.
People may begin like an exodus out of cities. Right. And now you may have like property values falling. And I kind of just
property values falling.
Well,
let me just say, in terms of residential property values, I think they're going to fall probably in cities. I think rent is going to drop in cities, and I think in suburbs, property values are going to probably go up.
Right. Yeah. So I live in North Philadelphia, and I'm actually kind of worried that where I live, value will go down, and yes, as you said, suburban areas will go up. And the final thing that I wanted to mention is kind of what happens with the compounding debts and interest. Because all of the loans have interest on them, they can never be fully repaid. There's not enough money in the system to actually pay the loans that go back out because you're always piling interest on top of the debt. So this is where everything ends up just on the Federal Reserve balance sheet graveyard when things go bankrupt because you're growing debt faster than you're growing anything else. So I've just, a lot of these things are beginning to look really worrying that regardless of how much they try to bail out these different sectors, the bottom just seems like it can continue going downward.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, there's this, it feels like people, the whole system is in a state of shock. Like they're just not, people just don't realize what's going on. And I'm very concerned. I don't, I'm very concerned about it.
Yeah. And one final quick thing. Thank you so much for all the time. I've been trying to look up the credit creation theory of money, which is what you're either the fractional reserve banking theory of money, the credit creation theory of banking, or I think it's the intermediary theory of banking. And what the credit reserve theory means is that when I go to, let's say you at the bank, and I say, here, I'm going to give you this, can I get a loan or a mortgage against my house? The banks just create the currency. They don't need to adhere to the fractional reserve banking theory. It's been empirically proven by Richard Berner, who actually went into the banks and showed the paper trail of how they go through the credit creation. And if you look at the Bank of England, I think they started admitting to it in like 2008, 2009. And a final thing to be leery of is the Federal Reserve Board on the 15th of March announced that the reserve requirement ratio was moved to 0 for the banking sector.
Right.
So they were trying to say, you have to keep something on your assets. But now they've even removed this final protection layer.
Right. And so we could be looking at a financial crisis down the road is what you're suggesting, because there's no people are over leveraged.
Yes, I think so. I'm not an economist either, so I'm a little bit leery to say that, I'm going to suggest something and it's going to happen. But
Right.
I do think that if people listen to, people like Varoufakis or Kelton or Steve Keen or Mark Blythe, there have been people shouting, on top of the rooftops for a long time, it's on fire, it's on fire, it's on fire. And the closer they get to the truth, in my opinion, the more media does not want to have them on. So I appreciate that you have these people on.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate the call.
Have a great day.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have a great day after that call. Thanks.
Can I just add maybe two quick things? We were already headed for a recession. Economists were saying that. A lot of them are pretending like they didn't now, but COVID was the anvil that broke the camel's back in that way. Also, thinking about how consumer demand is down just reminds me once more that so many crises of capitalism are crises of overproduction, which is one of the most insane aspects of this system in my mind, right? Like, people should only buy what they need. There shouldn't be an entire industry devoted to selling people crap that they don't need, right? But when people stop buying stuff they don't need, the whole system collapses. It just shows like how very nonsensical the whole thing is in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I in the main, I agree. I mean, part of, I don't know what, need is, but in that respect, like I can say that, like, I've reverted to just my pair of Carhartts. I'm not wearing my nicer pants, and that's because I'm not going anywhere.
You need the essentials like food, shelter, and like my Twitch stream subscriptions, for instance.
Right, exactly.
Like, I'm not saying we need some sort of austerity socialism at all, but I do think it would be good for people to think more about what they actually need and for things to be produced based on human needs instead of these insane wants created by advertising.
Right. That's what advertising does, is it basically convinces you do need this or that. Yeah. And it's, it's going to be interesting to see, when we get to the other side of this, if there are, what positive values come out of it. Surely there's going to be some. Not 100%. I can't quite see them quite yet, but calling from an 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing good. I have to admit, you sound a bit like Bane again, Sam, in your audio. So. Oh,
and on the phone?
I wanted to call in. I had 2 points I have to make. First point, I want to call in and kind of defend Jamie from Friday.
From Friday. What happened on Friday?
To be honest, you guys were saying that it would cause great uproar and that people were so loyal to Biden that people would be so upset if he were not the nominee.
I don't think I was saying people. I was saying that.
Removed him. And
let me just hold on for 1 second. I wasn't saying people. I was saying there are significant numbers of people who voted for Biden and did so because they wanted to vote for Biden. And they would be upset, and they'd have a right to be upset if the nominee got overthrown by the DNC.
I think the reason those people, when people were given the choice of like 5 or 6 candidates, people fled from Biden in the same way people are fleeing from like the COVID virus. Like you look at his results in Iowa, you look at his results in New Hampshire, his results in Nevada, and the fact that according to exit polling, 50% of the people who voted for Biden voted for him because Jim Clyburn endorsed him. I'm not saying he wouldn't have won South Carolina. He probably would have won it probably by 5 or 10 points if Clyburn hadn't stepped in and endorsed him. But like,
Josh,
my point being is
what
that
makes you think that people that because people voted for Joe Biden because Jim Clyburn, now if Jim Clyburn came out maybe and said he should not be the nominee now, maybe it's a different story. But maybe there are people who think, I'm going to listen to Jim Clyburn. And I listened to Jim Clyburn and I voted for Joe Biden. They can still be upset that Joe Biden gets overthrown.
Sure. I think the reason people were voting for Joe Biden is because everybody told them to vote for Joe Biden. And I don't think I think people, you are right when you say that a generic Democrat could probably win against Donald Trump and that this was very non-ideological. And I think people just need to be told if they were going to switch them out, this person could beat Trump, especially when you look at the fact that like ideologically, people lined up with Bernie Sanders, according to the exit polls of all the Super Tuesday states and pretty much all of the states, including South Carolina, 51% of the people supported.
I know.
What does that scenario look like? What does the scenario look like?
I said, listen, I have those statistics seared in my mind. I said them so many times, but you're still saying that these people who voted for Joe Biden, even if they did so because Clyburn told them to, that they would be okay if the DNC came in and said, Joe Biden's out now.
Well, it wouldn't just be the DNC, right? It would be the entire apparatus that the
Joe
DNC.
Biden would remove himself.
Well, if Joe Biden removed himself, like I said on Friday, I know I said this, if Joe Biden resigned, then Joe Biden resigns, and they can't be mad that somebody told Joe Biden to get lost. But, and I don't know, like the DNC, or I don't know what the apparatus behind that or whatever, but the idea that these people will be like, oh, okay.
Like, sorry, guys, we told you to follow a rapist that is politically compromised in all sorts of ways, but trust us on this next one. Going into a general election, I just don't think that message is, I don't think people are thinking of the practicalities of it. Yes, it's their fault that the party lined up behind Biden. That sucks, and they should get heat for that. But as for like the plan of action in removing Biden, we all seem to agree that unless Biden does it himself, it's not going to happen.
Look, I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think it would be any less democratic than anything that's happened up until this point.
I think just overthrowing the ballots.
I just think that like
people voted.
I mean, people voted, and yes, you can say that voters are idiots. I say that all the time.
I'm not saying that.
Well, okay.
I don't think
but their votes need to matter.
How do you say that the DNC overthrowing and taking him off the ballot through some extraordinary rules that they have versus the voting, there's no difference in terms of the democratic nature of those?
They manufactured consent one direction. They can do it in the other direction.
But there's not even a vote. Like there's not even a vote.
That doesn't matter.
Okay.
If you can, it doesn't matter. What matters is the degree to which they can manufacture consent. And this is a very long process, right? I don't think you have to be stupid.
Is there a democracy that exists anywhere? Based upon what you've just defined for me in terms of like, there's no difference in the democratic, in between the DNC literally using rules to get rid of the candidate versus people voting. Where is there a democracy that exists in the world?
I mean, on the level of a nation state, I would say.
I'm just curious anywhere.
Oh, well, I mean, if you want specific examples, I've got a lot of admiration for the direct democracy that they have in the Zapatista territories of Chiapas.
And they don't try and advocate for anything? They don't. Nobody tries to manufacture any consent there.
People advocate, but there's not like a corporate media apparatus and a powerful institution of these two parties controlling everything with no other game in town.
I would just say, you don't need to wait until we don't have a corporate media structure before you like decide votes should be taken seriously in a primary. And I agree. Like, I distrust, for instance, the New York State Democratic Party entirely. I think they're like borderline fraudulent. I think people voted, and I think you can't set the precedent that, guess what, your votes don't matter. I think it's way messier than people are saying to swap out Joe Biden.
It's weird. It seems like a selective concern for democracy when like you yourself have made the analysis on this show that Biden winning had a lot more to do with the consolidation behind him by the Democratic Party and the messaging from the corporate media.
Yeah, but they voted.
But they still voted. Yes, people could not see that through that. I agree. But I think like, and you know, the way that I try and combat that is by, you know, and it may very well be a losing battle because I do not have a voice that is as strong as these other corporate entities, and I do not have a voice that is as strong as these other things. But I will agree that in the context of the Zapatistas, if the idea that everyone advocating has the same essential platform, right, without having a consolidation of mechanisms that are larger than an individual or small groups, if that is the definition of an undemocratic vote, then yes, there is no democracy. There's not going to be a democracy in the fall. We've never lived in a country that has had a democracy since, you know, probably at least 100 years, maybe more. I mean, prior to that, of course, it was slavery. So even when there was no aggregation of like newspapers or anything like that. So democracy does not exist. That's a little bit problematic because once democracy doesn't exist, then the idea of complaining about this stuff in terms of like who the candidate is irrelevant anyways. Right? I mean, if there's no degrees that one thing is more democratic than the other, because the existence of people who can amass enough wealth to make a stronger argument exists. And that means that the difference between taking a vote in these primaries and the DNC coming in and using the rules to change who the candidate is, if there's no difference in terms of the degree of democracy there, if one isn't more democratic or less democratic than the other, then you know what? Like, then whatevs.
I think there are differences and degrees of democracy within the system that we had, right? Like Astor Taylor's book, Democracy Doesn't Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone. Right. However, I do not think that this is one of those examples.
Okay.
I mean, I think our democracy is kind of like hanging by a thread.
Yes, but like, guys, do you understand how the Democrats used to pick the nominee? Like, yes, we've never been a democracy, but democracy isn't like ideal to be achieved. It's a force to be cultivated. And if you're all of a sudden going to decide like primary votes don't matter, for what notion? What are they going to go to the American people with? Are they going to go with it because of all of our reasons he's a neoliberal? Are they going to go with the Tara Reade stuff? This is just not a real thing you can go to the voters with who have already voted.
I'm just saying, I don't think
that the primaries haven't ended.
Yes, but what difference does that make? People could vote for Bernie in New York. They're not going to. They could. It weakens your case that the primaries are continuing because you're saying that the votes don't matter anyways. Right?
No, that's not what we're saying. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that I don't see the outrage, and I think Jamie and I have both acknowledged that it would have to be Biden who'd be the one to step down, but I don't think there would be outrage because all these people need to hear is this person can win, and then they would be okay with voting for someone in the primary or in the general election.
Yeah,
I think
that's how they got people to vote for Biden in the first place.
Right, again, but
why people voted for Biden in the first place.
Sorry, I was under the impression that the apparatus could do something. But if we're all agreed that if Biden said, like, guess what, I have a health thing or something, or Tara Reade's right, and somebody else should be the nominee, I agree that that person could probably beat Trump. I have no disagreement there. I just don't think the party can do anything.
I mean, I'm talking about it on a hypothetical level because I know that they never would, but I just don't think that democracy should be judged based on how well someone is or is not following rules that were written by our enemies to begin with.
Well, I'm not talking about following rules. I just think that voting is...
That's a rule.
I think voting is one to keep to,
fair enough.
personally.
Like if Bernie Sanders cheated and broke all of their rules that were written by our enemies and somehow won, the outcome would still be more democratic than if Biden followed all of their stupid rules and won fair and square, because the outcome would be more democratic.
Okay.
Like I'm looking at it in the wide angle.
That's where we have a difference. I think that's what it is.
I do have a second point.
Hold on one second. I think that democracy is a process. And I agree with you. The outcomes, I might like the outcomes better with Bernie Sanders, and I might even support it. But the fact is, from my perspective, they would still be anti-democratic. Now, I'm willing to step out and say, like, in certain instances, yeah. I mean, maybe I would support anti-democratic, measures to support an outcome I like. I mean, I can't think of it. I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking. But I also would recognize that in the meantime, all these people that I think are, should, that I'm convinced, were had their consent manufactured for Joe Biden, I think that they might be upset. I don't think that I would be able to convince them so easily, but maybe you're right.
I mean, I'm not just talking about democracy in the narrow sense of voting. I'm talking about economic democracy, right? Because these things have been artificially separated, but they really shouldn't be. But in terms of like how mad people would or wouldn't be, like, I don't know. I'm sure some people would be mad. I'm sure a lot more people wouldn't be. Like, I mean, we had on Brandon Sutton not that long ago.
We just have a disagreement about a complete hypothetical. We could be arguing about the weather.
It's not going to happen, but
in 3 weeks.
But like, I'm just thinking about the anecdote, right, about the Iowa caucus, where like all of the people who liked Buttigieg or Amy were like crying when their candidate didn't get enough votes, and the Biden people were all like, whatever.
I don't remember that, but Josh, go ahead. What's the next one?
I guess this sort of piggybacks off of what we're talking about, corporate media. Did anyone watch the Bernie Blackout documentary that was on Vice?
No, I have not yet.
It's really depressing to watch. But one of the things I'm thinking of, and one of the things that you guys were talking about on Friday as well, is about how there's less of an outrage over the way, not the Trump handling of the COVID situation, but the way Democrats are handling the bailout, what Pelosi is doing, as compared to the outrage and the anger in the 40s and 30s, and how we got the New Deal. And I think for me, the problem is, and I don't know what the solution is, and maybe this is a question for you guys, is the problem is that the corporate media is telling us that Pelosi is doing a fine job, that, the economy was good before this, that this crash was sort of really extraordinary event, when we know that we were kind of headed towards a meltdown. And I'm not sure, what do you think the way is that the working class is going to have to fight? How do you think the working class will fight and will be able to fight against these sort of corporate powers? Because I think it's much harder for us than it was in the era of the New Deal, especially when you have these media companies basically being controlled by corporate entities, where they're promoting content that is basically it's basically propaganda, more or less. And I don't know if this makes any sense to you guys, but I mean, I think we're in a very hard battle in terms of really getting sort of an agenda similar to a New Deal or moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that anything is going to come out of this for a while. I mean, Occupy, which was the closest to the sort of like the biggest manifestation we had in terms of pushback from the 2008 crisis, didn't happen until 2011. Really, basically, 3 years almost. I think October. October to October. 3 years out. So I mean, I think. I don't know. I don't know that it's going to be limited to the working class. There's no reason to believe that, the same forces that convince, working class voters in South Carolina, let's say, to vote for Joe Biden are not going to be able to convince people that they're getting as much as they deserve. But I think, it's going to take time. But appreciate the call, Josh.
I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens when the quarantine is lifted. Some people are acting like they're ready to throw down. So, and other people aren't. So we'll see.
Let's go to 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo, what's up?
Hey guys, what's going on? Haven't called in a while because I just kind of wanted to get over the whole Bernie thing and what's going on. And I think this whole Joe Biden thing is going to go unresolved because, like Sam, for a lot of the argument, I think I'm on your side. But I think is Joe Biden? But I think like the question of is Joe Biden eminently replaceable? That's definitely in the air. That's no question. He is definitely replaceable. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But is he so weak as to he's replaceable? Absolutely. There's no question about that. He's weak as hell.
Oh, no. I agree that he as a candidate is replaceable. I mean, he's just a placeholder, like literally a placeholder. That seems to be the strategy. But I just think that the idea that the DNC is going to come in there and replace him without there being, a broad pushback and it being sort of a disaster, I think is, unless there's like some obvious thing, he's had a heart attack or, he goes on and has a stroke on camera. Cause I think they probably would avoid doing it if he wasn't on camera. I just think I don't know, but I don't want to spend too much time on this because this conversation is honestly like it's like a hypothetical inside a hypothetical around a bubble that is, people can go out and vote still in primaries going forward. In New York, we have one June 23rd. People can vote by mail and they can vote against Joe Biden.
But these primaries are massively attenuated, though.
Yeah, I agree. It's also part of the problem.
I want to say this also. I just want to kind of move on to another thing. But because, we can talk about this all day. I agree.
Where are you going?
The thing is, though, yeah, I know. Listen, I get what you're saying, but I just think, Sam, just a little bit, maybe just a little bit. Like, there's definitely in the air. There's just definitely like a feeling in the air, like this guy is freaking weak. I'm sorry, I haven't met anybody. Like, and you said this before, too.
I agree.
But
what do you do about it?
But I do think like there's definitely like a current of weakness in the air about Joe Biden. And there's one other thing I want to talk about, just real quick, because the Bernie thing is heartbreaking. Listen, the Republicans, that's just their day, okay?
You got to talk into the phone, dude. You're just getting quieter and quieter.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry, Sam. Basically, look, the Republicans. Look, it's just a bunch of thieves, thugs, and rapists, okay? That's just their day. That's just their due. What I really want to focus on, and look, I get it. Look, Trump is a bad guy. I get it. Yes, I get all of that. But some of these Democrats have to be punished now. I mean politically punished. Like Pelosi and some of these guys, a list has to start to emerge. Because listen, I voted for Hillary Clinton once. I did it, okay? With all the white supremacy, with all the dog whistles, with all the misogyny, boosting and burnishing Bill Clinton, I did it. Okay, I held my nose. I did it. For Joe Biden, I'm gonna let it clear I'm gonna let it be known very clear. I'm not voting for Joe Biden again. I'm not voting for Joe Biden in sense. I'm sorry, not again. But I'm not voting for Joe Biden because I'm tired of supporting the same class of thieves, thugs, and rapists. This guy does not support me.
That's
another thing too. Like, wait, hold on. One more thing, guys. There's another thing too. Because listen, I get it. Okay, I really get it on some level. This is a very important election. But at the same time, Joe Biden, he's been part of collective. Like, we saw Ahmaud Arbery get killed, okay? That's part of the crime, though. That's part of that racist environment that he's just boosting and burnishing. And I'm sick of it.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question.
Wait, hold on. Wait, Sam, hold on. One second. Where's this thing? Also, I have two sisters. Okay? I'm tired of supporting racists. I'm not doing it, Sam. Listen, I agree.
Okay, I got you. You're not doing it. But let me just say this. It's clear you're not going to vote for Joe Biden. But if Joe Biden was president right now, the DOJ would be down there. There's no doubt about that. There's just no doubt about it. It's undeniable. It's a fact. The Office of Civil Liberties would be down on that police department and that prosecutor already.
No.
Fact. Fact.
No, disagree.
All right. That's where our disagreement is. That's our disagreement. I look at the Obama administration. I look at the consent decrees that were there. I look on day one when Donald Trump took over. I saw those consent decrees lifted. I saw the message, explicit message to those police departments. We will not interfere in these type of things. And if you think that Joe Biden can last for 5 minutes as president without having the DOJ down there, then you and I we do not see. You could be looking outside and I could say sunny day and you could look outside and say dark, no sun, raining. That's what we're going on here.
I tend to think the lifting of those decrees was more symbolic than anything.
And Jamie thinks they're useless. Maybe that's the case. Maybe the federal government has nothing to do with racism that exists in urban centers or state departments. Maybe there's no history of the Civil Rights Division doing anything that is positive in any way for police brutality. Maybe that exists. But okay, fine. You don't want to vote for Joe Biden? Don't vote for Joe Biden. Good luck. Hope that he wins anyways.
Wait.
I'm sick of this conversation. It's dumb. I get it. Joe Biden sucks.
Hold on. Sam, let me just say this. I have to say, because this is very important. I do get what you're saying. I'm not dismissing Sam, you're a crank, I'm not trying to play a Jimmy Dore card here. Okay, not at all. I'm not freaking, I'm not one of these lunatics. But what I'm trying to say is here that, guess what? We had a black president, we had Joe Biden, whatever, and they're still killing black people every day.
I get it.
Okay. So big deal. The consent decree was symbolic.
Well, then maybe it'll get better if Donald Trump has a second term. Maybe if 4 more years of destroying the apparatus that our federal government has to deal with this, maybe that'll help. Go back and listen to Sam Bagenstos, who we had on the program in 2016, who was at the DOJ under Clinton and then came back after 8 years of Bush. Go back and listen to that. Maybe these people who work in these offices, maybe they know crap. Maybe it does nothing. Maybe it means nothing. In which case, let's just wrap this shit up. What are we wasting our time here for? There's no difference between appointing who the nominee is or voting for it. There's no difference between a functioning Department of Justice, civil liberties, and just police departments being told, go ahead. There'll be absolutely no punishment, no retribution for what you do. You will have no accountability. Maybe these things mean absolutely nothing. In which case, let's just wait until the shit hits the fan and maybe things will be better.
I don't think we have to wait. The shit has hit the fan.
Okay. I appreciate the call, man. I'm going. I'm moving on. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm done. I'm done with it. You know what? There's plenty of other places to do, but this is all just sort of this is all just wankery.
Can I just say, we all agree that price must be paid, but we can't just will it to be vote for Greens or vote for something else on the election day. It's all wankery. That's all it is.
We're spending way too much time on this.
Exactly.
It is you have to believe that none of this stuff is relevant. And I don't believe that. The reason why I have these people on who work in the government or talk about these things is because I think that even if it's incremental, it has some meaning. If it has no meaning, then fine. Then nothing has meaning. Great.
I mean, looking at the outcomes, it is clear from study after study in city after city that the only real way to reduce police violence against the populace, especially Black and brown people, is to reduce the budget of police departments and to shut down jails. That is the best way to keep people safe.
Best or the only way?
The best way.
There can be no incremental, stop and frisk.
The most bang
on,
for your
off,
buck.
doesn't make a difference. Stop and frisk doesn't make a difference. We could reinstitute it tomorrow, and it wouldn't make a difference in the lives of individuals.
It does. That is part of reducing police activity, taking away stop and frisk. Yes.
Do you know the process in which stop and frisk ended?
I'm sure you want to tell us.
Federal judiciary. Do you know who appoints the federal judiciary? Do you want to bet that it wasn't a Trump or a Bush appointee who ended that?
Sure.
I mean, the point is that these things, which are, I get they are not, sexy or monumental or whatnot, but the incremental difference in people's lives who are no longer stopped by stop and frisk, that's a benefit. It hasn't solved anything beyond that. It has made those people, those kids who will not get stopped, their lives are slightly better. They have one less obstacle to compete with in their life. They haven't been stopped by a dozen times by the cops every time they step out of their house.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly isn't nothing, but I think you also need to be more sensitive to the reasons why people like Bro Flamingo would be hesitant to vote for Joe Biden.
I just said, don't vote for Joe Biden.
People who've been hurt by the policies that he played a direct role in.
I get it.
And might continue to
I get it, but we have a binary
choice.
We have a binary choice. It's either him or Donald Trump. Period. End of story. In New York, I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and I hope that New Yorkers join me. And maybe if a majority of people vote against Joe Biden in the primary in New York, that will go some way to creating some type of sense that Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee. But everything else is just I'm sorry. It's wankery. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. And it's a waste of my time.
It's not strategy, it's personal expression.
It's not strategy. I get it. I've said multiple times, I've had multiple people who have written me and said, I can't vote for Joe Biden. I'm a victim of sexual assault. I can't vote for Joe Biden. Fine. I get it. But the idea that if they writ me and said, I'm a victim of sexual assault, and if I vote for Joe Biden, I think there's going to be more sexual assault than there would be if Donald Trump was president, that's a different story. If Bro Flamingo doesn't want to vote for Joe Biden because he feels that Joe Biden's policies has impacted him and he emotionally can't do it, that's fine. But to say that it is meaningless, the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, to say that it's a strategy to not vote for Joe Biden, I'm sorry. None of those things are true. And I'm not doing a show and spending hour after hour after hour talking about how, I get it. If you have an emotional issue that keeps you from voting for Joe Biden, fine. That's not fine. But to say that it makes no difference, I'm sorry, it's just.
Or maybe people think it won't make enough of a difference.
You know what? That's on them. Because then you have to deny all the things that I've said. Stop and frisk.
Not
important.
If you sat there and you say, okay, the cops used to kill 100 Black people a month, and now they only kill 99 Black people a month. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Still not good enough.
I agree.
No one's saying be satisfied with that.
No one's saying be satisfied, but you have two options. Which one do you prefer, 100 or 99?
Yeah, I mean, if I have to choose, obviously I prefer less death.
Boom.
That's
the whole conversation.
Which is why I still hope that Biden beats Trump in spite of how much I hate him.
Exactly.
But I'm also sensitive to the reasons why people wouldn't think that it matters.
Exactly. I am too. We're in agreement. But that's my point, is that we keep having this conversation over and over again. 99 better than 100. And I'm not saying that we should be satisfied with 99, but we have a binary choice. This is one of the few times in our politics where we have binary choices, and that's on election day.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why I'm still trying to die on this hill, because I think it's not the most important thing right now.
It's not.
Voting.
No, like there's, and to the extent that there's like any life left on this hill, like, let's just try and convince people to vote for Bernie in New York. I don't think that's going to make that much of a difference, but it could.
Yeah. I talked to my mom yesterday and convinced her to vote for Bernie in Pennsylvania.
I'm convinced that if, all of a sudden, I don't know what would precipitate it, but if all of a sudden, Bernie started winning primaries again, that would be good. That might, Joe Biden might push 1 or 2 percentage points, and who knows what else can happen. But like and like I say, emotionally speaking, I can understand why people wouldn't want to vote for somebody from an emotional standpoint, but it's not strategy. And it's, it's just, I'm just talking from an objective standpoint. The fact of the matter is that the implications of Donald Trump being president on me in particular, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it would, outside of my mental state, I don't think it's going to have any type of material impact on me. For the worst, I don't know. Maybe they'll start to audit, but I've paid all my taxes. But from a purely objective standpoint, if anything means anything, then Donald Trump is worse for marginalized people in this country,
well, I mean, to look at the police, I mean, I bet the sergeants think that Trump is better for them than the generic Democrat, for instance.
I think without a doubt. I think it does make a difference. Consent decrees, I think having the DOJ breathing down your neck, I think it does make a difference. I mean, we've had former cops who've IM'd the show, who've called into the show, who've emailed, and the thing they said over and over again, there's not going to be any change until you have DAs who are going to start to come down on these cops, and they're going to know that they can't get away with this. And when DAs don't do it, then the DOJ's got to step in. And there's a reason why. Maybe it was just completely performative on Jeff Sessions' part. Why he basically lifted all these consent decrees and said to these police departments, the DOJ is not going to interfere in your work. But I think it was probably also because he knew what happened. It's basically like, guys, we're just not paying attention anymore. In fact, we're going to protect you.
Yeah. I mean, most of the good things that have happened in history have been because people who were oppressed were like, these incremental changes, not good enough. We need more. We're not going to wait. That said, voting doesn't really factor into that much in my mind.
I agree. That's what I mean. We're spending too much time on this.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Here is Alex Azar coming out, Health and Human Services, basically explaining that the reason why we have so many people dying in this country versus other countries is because, well, here it is.
This as a country. Jake, you can't celebrate a single death. Every death is a tragedy, but the results could have been vastly, vastly worse. It's also important to remember, Jake, as we
But
face
it's worse for us than it is for anyone else.
No, that's actually not factually correct. When you look at mortality rates, that's simply not correct as a percent of diagnosed cases, Jake. That every death is tragic.
As a percent of diagnosed cases. And how are they defining diagnosed cases? I mean, this guy, it's unbelievable, but go ahead.
That every death
I'm
is
just looking
tragic.
at the number of dead bodies.
Every death is tragic, but we have maintained our healthcare burden within the capacity of our system to actually deal with it. Unfortunately, the American population is a very diverse and it is a population with significant unhealthy comorbidities that do make many individuals in our communities, in particular African American minority communities, particularly at risk here because of significant underlying disease health disparities and disease comorbidities. And that is an unfortunate legacy in our healthcare system that we certainly do need to address. But no, the response here in the United States has been historic to keep this within our healthcare capacity, even in New York and New York City, to keep this within capacity is genuinely a historic result.
Even
I want to give you an opportunity.
Clear it up. I mean, I want to see where Jake goes here, but even Azar was waiting for Jake to respond to like, hey, wait a second. Do we have a bigger problem in society? Because there's nothing genetically predisposing African Americans to being the biggest taking disproportionate share of deaths or having comorbidities. Is this a problem of maybe the fact that we have a racist society and we close down hospitals in their neighborhoods, that we don't provide health insurance for all our people? Do we have a larger societal issue? Azar even pauses and waits for Jake to have some type of response to that. I mean, it's just continue.
Because it sounded like you were saying that the reason that there are so many dead Americans is because we're unhealthier than the rest of the world. And I know that's not what you meant.
No, I think that we have a significantly disproportionate burden of comorbidities in the United States: obesity, hypertension, diabetes. These are demonstrated facts that do make us at risk for any type of disease burden.
Sure, of course, but that doesn't mean it's the fault of the American people that our government failed to take adequate steps in February.
Oh no, Jake! Please don't distort. No, but this is not about fault. It's about simple epidemiology and stating that if we have hypertension, if we have diabetes, we present with greater risk of severe complications from this coronavirus. That's all I was saying, and you know that. This is not. One doesn't blame an individual for their health conditions. That would be absurd. It's simply a statement that we do have greater risk profiles here in the United States.
Unbelievable.
Wow. Is
Yeah,
he doing race science?
Yeah.
Well, I like the part where Tapper goes, I know you're not trying to be racist here. And he's like, oh, no, I think I am. I think I am trying to be a little racist.
I'm not saying that black people should blame themselves for having those comorbidities, but
it's not their fault.
Comorbidity fits. It's amazing that they can have this conversation without Tapper saying, well, then wait a second. What larger, what have you done? What has your administration done to deal with this obvious shortfall? Your Health and Human Services. You've been in office for X amount of years. What is Health and Human Services doing to diminish this rate of comorbidities? Why has there been less federal funding for hospitals? Why were you attempting to get rid of health insurance for millions of people who have been on expanded Medicaid? I mean, this is like, but it was helpful. Jake saying, like, I know you're not being racist. Unbelievable. Let's all right, let's just watch this woman refusing to, let's just end on this. We'll play this tomorrow. All right, folks, I don't have time for any more calls. Apologies. We'll just take some IMs and get out of here. Rave Dubin. Sam, when are you going to start streaming games on Twitch? We've been waiting. Yeah, believe me. Sam's Tinder picture before bed. Sam, how do you deal with rejection in dating? Also, what are your thoughts on Joshua Collins' debacle? I deal with rejection in dating the way I've dealt with rejection all the time. I just blame the other person. Who's Joshua Collins?
Oh,
he's the trucker socialist running in Washington for Denny Heck's seat.
Yeah, I interviewed him. What happened?
Some concerns about his funding.
Oh, really?
He deleted his Twitter for a day and everyone got mad, and that's most of what I know about it.
I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I haven't followed it. Thames Darwin. Sam, I'm really sorry as you were to hear about Marin's partner and Fred Willard's deaths. Strangely, I mentioned both Marin and Willard in an IM I sent to you a couple of weeks ago. So 2 things. First, same IM mentioned Cross and Benjamin. So let's all say a prayer for those 2. Second, given my track record, are there any people you'd like me to IM about in the future? Think it over and let me know. Jeez. 10 lawn gnomes. Continuing the racing analogy, not only are big businesses given the green, the small businesses aren't allowed a pit stop and must carry on without the ability to fix a leaky fuel line. Automatic stabilizers should kick in as soon as a state of emergency is declared, and whoever makes the declaration foots the bill, just as well for COVID and hurricanes and blizzards. Yeah, I agree. Alex B. Sam, I'm trying to help my girlfriend make at-home piano recordings from a keyboard. Can you remind me the Skillshare link? Well, you Google Majority Report Skillshare, and I think it's number 8 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And Bonara, look at the lives of me and my family are important, but we will all sacrifice ourselves willingly if it gives Pelosi a better CBO score. Jeremy F. Good afternoon, MR crew. I got social distance town hall married this Saturday and would love a shofar if you could spare one. Love you guys. Happy. Getting married. Eric Berg. Do Democrats think the CBO scores are something that even 0.1% of voters have even heard of, much less care about? They've all been exchanging the same recycled air in the bunker for so long there's no oxygen left. Yeah, exactly. Okay, 2 more. Dolink. Talk to Hayes about her last appearance on his last show. He was obviously not impressed. He kept asking pointed questions. She kept on going on about the pillars. She sounded like Biden's befuddled responses. It was shocking and disheartening irishness. I don't know who you're talking about.
About Pelosi.
Oh, Pelosi? Okay.
Yeah.
Gons. Final IM of the day. Sam, unseat Schumer. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there.